Yeah. I listened to a couple of the podcasts, and I like the format. You picked up a listener here as well. So
Oh, thank you.
Aware and
You're the one, huh? All right, cool.
I'm a little hurt that Justin decided not to show up today, but
He's the absolute worst.
I had made a joke at one point that the, linear buyer's journey, is no longer this like funnel that's, kind of straight and easy to manage stage by stage. It probably looks more like a spaghetti bowl. There was definitely pockets, for us where we were winning a lot, but they weren't retaining because they just weren't good fits. And so being able to spot those moments of like, we're wasting calories on this, kind of part of our ICP, we really need to make sure we carve that out and not, kind of add to this problem here.
Welcome to another episode of the Cheat Code and Friends podcast. We have Sean Kessler today. Sean, how are you doing?
Great. I'm a little hurt that Justin decided not to show up today, but
he's the absolute worst. Like, we can't trust that guy for anything. I don't even know why we bother having him on the show. He brings no insights. He shows up late. So we're probably better off for it. And I know our new friend is going to be awesome today in filling Justin's shoes. So today we have the Chief Revenue Officer from Orum, John Eitel. We are super excited to have you on the show to talk about driving revenue in startup land. Welcome.
Awesome. Excited to be here. And it's going to be hopefully a fun session here.
Yeah. So, within our portfolio, we do a ton of, we'll call it CRO type of work, helping folks with go-to-market across sales, marketing, and partnerships. But you had sent something interesting pre-show around just like startup land being nuts and the necessity to be agile. But as a chief revenue officer, like, what does that even mean?
Yeah. Well, it's funny. Actually, I'm sure everybody's feeling it, and it's complete chaos, with all the shifting and changing. You've got technology shifting, underneath our feet. You've got economic headwinds. You've got, all these things that are just kind of, playing all at once here. And, I think it does reinforce like new skills, new muscles. It changes the way that we think about, coming into environments or shifting environments and taking teams through change. And, I'm here for it. I think actually it's been, kind of refreshing maybe in some ways. I think that's probably like my way of like smiling through the chaos here and, realizing that like this is actually a great moment if we can embrace it. And, some new leaders will be formed in this time here. And so, it's a great kind of challenge for all of us to kind of step up here.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I guess in the spirit of agility, it seems like, AI is the thing, right? And we're all dealing with the good, the bad, and the ugly. Talk to me a little bit about how it's impacting your role and how it's changing how you manage your teams and go to market.
Yeah. So, so at Orum, we're, a dialing platform, a modern dialing platform that actually uses AI, to help people connect more effectively and, reinforces something that was old is new again. So the phone is, definitely kind of come back in vogue, and it's been, really great to see it. But I would say like, in my own world, it's, definitely a lot about how do we kind of help people embrace some of these tools at their, kind of fingertips and use them to make the teams more, successful, like while we are also navigating the same changes our customers are. Right. And so, tool stacks are changing. I think like every company I come into, I just feel like, there's always like a tool stack audit that needs to be done. And I think like everybody's doing that, 10X now. And, really kind of, rethinking some of the things that they've used in the past. So we're no strangers to that. We're evaluating all sorts of different tools and, rethinking the ones that we bought maybe years ago. We're bringing new stuff into the fold. And I think that's really fun. I think we're also like helping our sellers, embrace some of these tools at their fingertips too, and getting them to use either the ones that we've, kind of brought into our own standards or helping them also drive innovation and change by, bringing some new things that work for them and testing them and, spreading that across the team. So it's just like lots of change on change while changing, which is, kind of part of the, kind of the fun we're in.
Yeah, John. So just going back a little bit, you're talking about, being agile through change with outside of, let's remove AI for a second. What do you think has changed the most from a sales leader's perspective and over the past decade, from the way that things need to be done, like whether it be, could be technology, it could be the tactics used, like could be the way the buyer buys, right? So, what have you seen that you've had to manage through?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think like everybody focuses on AI because I think that's like been the most jarring part and like the most, I'd say just dramatic in the way it was implemented and the way that we all, kind of got thrust into it. But I think you're absolutely right, Sean. Like I would say, like this started actually like 10 years ago, probably. I think that's actually when I started to, kind of feel like buyer behavior was starting to shift and change, I'd made a joke at one point that the, linear buyer's journey, is no longer this like funnel that's, kind of straight and easy to manage stage by stage. It probably looks more like a spaghetti bowl where, customers are kind of coming in and out and you're capturing that like different moments. And so that shift started, I want to say, probably 10-ish years ago. And buyers are more informed. They're coming to us later. They're not, that's that, kind of traditional model we were all taught of like, they come to us to get information and then we guide them through this very straight line process, so that change has happened and it's just continuing. And, I think some stats have showed up that like 80% of buyers that, kind of you come into contact with are already pretty far down the journey by the time you meet with them. And so that I think set the stage here, then the pandemic, let's throw in, the time we shut down the world for a couple of years and, kind of sent everybody home. But look, all workforces went distributed, and buyers went distributed, right? So I think like no longer do our buyers all come into an office and sit at a desk with a phone at it, right? They're in a coffee shop, they're in their homes. And so, they're now moving targets that buy differently. And then you put AI on top of that. I think that, kind of really was the, kind of the third domino in this effect. But I think probably, again, those things all coming together is really, kind of sent this thing into just a spin of change here.
You alluded to a little bit earlier, the idea of what's old is new, right? In relation to the phone and dialing people. And we've had this conversation on the show a few times, in this attention economy, right? Where it's so noisy and it's really, really hard to capture people across email or social or whatever and be an interruption that someone's going to pay attention to. Sometimes the things that you have to do aren't really that scalable. Like sometimes it's stuff you just have to do to grab attention. So I actually know that I have a company I advise that uses your platform. So talk to me a little bit about that balance of scale versus just, we got to get stuff done. And it may not always be scalable.
Yeah. No, look, I think it's a funny thing you're bringing up. And I would say like, amidst all this change, it's always good to go back to like what hasn't changed, right? And so I think that's, what's causing this like resurgence and like what is, once old is now new again here. And so I think like going back to like the things that we knew that worked, and, like I love what we're doing with Orum. I do think, because of all those things that we talked about, I actually had, this like, crisis of confidence maybe 5 years ago where I saw like actually, my sales team, during the, I'd say 21, 22 kind of era, doing less and less dialing, they just were, again, with all the troubles of finding buyers, being able to find, phone numbers, data, being able to connect with them, it just became harder and it's already hard already. So they were avoiding it. And so they started doing index on all these other channels like social and email, right? And some, it was really great actually to meet the team at Orum, at that time, because I was like, all right, someone else sees this problem, and they're adapting and building a scaled model to do it more effectively. And, we take it even further. And not only do we make it like very dead simple for teams to dial, and we make it where they don't have to do a lot of the, 30 minutes of hunting to, go find Josh and find his contact information and, get ready to talk to him. Like it just, kind of all sets up the dominoes for that to happen. And so I think that's what I like about it, which I think also kind of reinforces, again, a muscle that we may have lost, during the, the times when it got hard there. The distributed nature of teams too. Like I think there's, many companies that'll never go back into an office. And, you all probably remember this, but I would say like, the power of this, and the energy of the sales floor, the ability to actively listen to what's going on right beside you. And like, it's, hearing a crash and burn and being able to learn through that as well. And, sometimes being, that person in that moment, and, having others learn from it. So like that's been lost in this situation. And so our Salesforce technology, like brings the teams together in, a call room that they can work together on. They can celebrate each other. They can listen to each other's calls. And I think that really is kind of helping, kind of fix, some of the deficiencies that distributed work kind of, thrust into the sales environment there. And then, we have actually our newest product that I'm most excited about is AI coaching, but it really helps with the challenge that the managers feel where, there's about 1,000 calls that go on in any given week, at least in many sales teams. And so, the ability for a frontline leader to be able to scale to that number and cover it means that they'd sit in, basically, they sit at their desk for hours listening to calls. And so using AI to be able to go assess those calls, score those calls, surface like meaningful insights, really shifts the dynamic of the one-on-one. So now when an SDR sits down with their leader, and says, I made 200 calls this week. What do I do differently? In the old way of doing it, the manager would be sitting there saying like, I don't know, try this, and, it actually allows them to pull up a dashboard and actually see those insights, capture those moments of things they did well. And so, be able to celebrate, reinforce them, and then also realize, okay, hey, you're struggling with this objection, you're struggling with this competitor. Let's give you some assignments to go work on that. Let me give you, 10 calls from Sean to go listen to because he's really nailing it. And so, in a lot of ways, it does feel like we have a chance to go kind of like, fix a lot of the potholes and, kind of broken road in the sales, kind of journey, and help sellers get to where they need to quicker, which I think has been, something that has also been a side effect of all the chaos here.
Yeah. Well, as a revenue leader, you kind of have to zoom out, right? And think about the market and how you're going to attack it. And when you've got a roughly, fairly horizontal solution that is for sales teams and B2B, how do you think about where you can win and how you're going to build pipeline? Like, what's your process? Because I think in startup land, and we know we struggle with this in our portfolio, which is one of the reasons why we focus on vertical SaaS, because it narrows down that segmentation just out of the gates, right?
Yeah,
it helps you create that focus. And I find that, horizontal SaaS right now is tough, right? Like, how do you focus and find the ideal? So talk us through your thought process, right? Like, how are you looking at the market? How do you want to attack it? How are you going to build pipeline? Like, a great rundown would be awesome.
Yeah. Look, I think you nailed it in just your aside on where you like to invest. But I would say, look, focus is the strategy. And I think actually without, kind of hitting like basic stuff that most people know already, I think it's always a good reminder of like the basics. Sometimes we forget, really, nailing down your ICP and making sure that you understand what it is. And I do think, if I was new at a company, I would do that in my first, kind of 30, 60, 90. But if I'd been at a company even for a couple of years with all this change, I would say like every year you should be like revisiting it, making sure that you're centered on it and that you're learning through it. Because, we even spotted trends, in our, kind of ICP mapping from, years prior where, we would focus on, usually certain verticals where we were winning. And like one of them was recruiting. And, as all of us know, like recruiting kind of was one of the, the parts of the organization that was really cut back over the last few years. But like, if we'd kept following that target, we would have been, just kind of hitting our head against the wall. Now it's actually, having a great comeback and resurgence. And so again, like making sure that where you win, and that you've got the value prop nailed and you have the resources and you've got the case studies and all the things to support the sellers and making sure that the sellers don't drift outside of that. When times get tough, I think that's, also some of this too, is that they start, going places that they shouldn't and don't realize that they're wasting cycles and time doing it.
Yeah. It's funny. I mean, I don't think anyone's going to argue with like nailing your ICP, but I'm curious, and you kind of started to touch on it a little bit there. Like, how do you represent that to people? Like, are there specific data points? Like, how does it get used in an impactful way?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's exactly it. I think like taking it down to, something that's not completely boring in boardroom speak, but I think, really is, it's largely about, your data for your win losses. I think that's something that you really, kind of use to inform this. And, again, that's why it's good to refresh it because it changes sometimes over time. And so keeping a really clear, kind of eye on that. I do also think, something that, everybody's doing right now too is really trying to understand their retention challenges, and so I think like, don't just think about how you're winning, think about the customers that you're retaining and which are the ones that are the most healthy for you. And, that really, is an educational, like, journey to go down too, because I think, there was definitely pockets, for us where we were winning a lot, but they weren't retaining because they just weren't good fits. And so like, being able to spot those moments of like, we're wasting calories on this, kind of part of our ICP, we really need to make sure we carve that out and not, kind of add to this problem here.
You can feel that one, huh, Shaw?
Yeah. Um,
Hit you in
So
the
John,
bones
you
maybe a little bit.
yeah, that's right. So you sell to sales teams. I at first became familiar with Orum back when we did a partnership when I worked at SalesLoft. They were one of our earlier integrations. So one thing we had in common is that we both had to sell to sales folks, which is hard. So like game respects game, right? And you get to see the inside of a lot of organizations. What pisses you off that you see that just you see time and time again, or just the thing that you're like, that organizations do that, one is the wrong thing to do, but you see them do it time and time again that you could, I don't know if you could wave a magic wand and fix it in an organization. Like what is the thing that really like grinds your gears, if you will?
Yeah, good one, man. Actually, as you say, and I like selling to sales. Like I think I've sold to IT developers, I've sold to marketers. I don't know. It's fun when it's you, but it definitely is harder, right? Like you can't fake it. I think there's definitely a good litmus test of if you're real or not. And the other person will sense it quickly. I think like my big ones right now, like I do think, I don't think that, phone is the end all be all. Like I actually get that, silly question sometimes of like, if you could pick one channel for prospecting, what would it be? And I was like, I'm not going to do it.
Right.
Because my answer is multi-channel, multi-touch, and you gotta alternate it. I think that's the thing, that's, because everything's shifting and changing, phone's having a great heyday right now, but, like that will shift over time again too. And so, we talked to a lot of teams who are like, we're not really interested in phone, or we don't think phone's a priority. And I'm just like, I kind of wish I could shake you right now, but, I can't, and you're going to have to figure this out the hard way. And I think it doesn't have to be with Orum, but I think that's just a tell of like, they haven't realized that they're missing out on these opportunities and they're not, kind of diversifying their approach here. Other one is like coaching. Like I do think, one, coaching has gotten so hard with our, teams being distributed. Like I think everybody, really, was probably decent at it when we were all in an office together and they could watch, energy and activity. But I still talk to a lot of teams that don't really put emphasis on it, don't think about it, don't really, do regular one-on-ones and really have that discipline. And, that one makes me cringe a little bit too. Like, I think that, there's a lot of salespeople that, that's what they need. And so like they're losing out on that, ability to grow. And, I hear that often from folks where it's like, it's not really a focus of ours to really do a lot of coaching or one-on-ones. And I'm like, oh gosh, that's a painful thing to hear. And probably the thing that, grates at me a little bit here.
It's hard, right? Like spending time listening to calls, being on calls as a leader, it's time consuming, but the investment that you make in people is significant regardless if you coach them or not, right? Because if you don't, you just let them go and you churn them out and you have to go hire somebody else, that is going to cost you money. If you do and they stick around, they don't perform, and they moderately perform, it's going to cost you money, right? So putting some of that into like just understanding where people are and trying to up level them is worth the investment in my mind. I mean, not everyone's going to get it and be great, but I think that that's one of the things that we've learned looking in our portfolio is like, how do we help up level the people that we have? Because startup land is hard enough as it is. So if you can bring people along with you and give them a taste of what good looks like. I think most people want to do well, right? They don't want to just be average. So I think if you have those tools and mechanisms for coaching, I think it's huge. And enabling frontline managers, revenue leaders, whatever it may be, to the opportunity to coach is phenomenal. But it does make me wonder a little bit about, I would love to get your take on the role of the AE now, right? Like as the Salesforce, Aaron Ross, SDR, AE, customer success, handoff seems to be losing momentum. You're pitching a platform that, helps people efficiently get a hold of more people, right? So you don't have to spend as much time dialing per se. What's your take on the AE role, right? Are SDRs still relevant? What, is it full
Yeah.
cycle? Is what's
Yeah.
dead? What's alive? What's
Yeah, who's
thriving?
dying and why did
Yeah.
we kill him? And
Yeah.
no, look, I think it's a great question, and I think it's so relevant right now. Like, I think everybody needs to also rethink. Like, no, there's no sacred cows, and there's no kind of things that we shouldn't be challenging. And I think like I've heard you all talk about this with your past guests. Like, I think we sometimes have overcomplicated things. Like, we built this really complex system with very defined roles to optimize certain outcomes here. And look, I created a bunch of those roles. Like, I actually remember early in my career where I'm like, gosh, 80% of my seller's time is spent on stuff that doesn't matter. Like, let's create a junior role, right? And so anyways, I do think, we need to think about it, from the customer experience, and the outcomes again, we're trying to drive. And if you can minimize those handoffs and if you can, kind of reduce, some of the complexity, like that's a win. And so I think that, don't be afraid to assess those things. And it could be any and all of these things, right? It could be the SDRs, it could be the AEs, it could be the account manager, CSM, even the renewals roles that we've created at sometimes. Like, again, we've created such a complex, system, and I know how we got here, but it doesn't fly in the new normal that we're in today. And I think like, when you hear from your customers, like, I don't know who to go to for what, like I've got, 6 people's contact information, but like I need a decoder ring to understand, which one to engage for what, like that's a problem, right? And so I always like to think about it from there and think about, can we, kind of step back and maybe remove some of those handoffs and touch points and narrow, some of that focus there.
I got this philosophy that pretty early on, sub 5 million, maybe 3 million, your revenue is revenue, right? Like I really don't care if it's new business, existing business, whatever, but that doesn't scale forever.
Yeah.
Right. So even back to the what do people do concept, like where do you think those inflection points are of like, I need to have people focused on new business? What are those rules of engagement? How do you look at account management and expansion? How do you look at renewals and upsells? Like, what are kind of those inflection points in a business where you need to think about those things a little bit differently? Because it gets messy fast in startup land.
Yeah, no, especially if you're scaling really quickly, which I think, there's lots of folks who are in this thing. And so you're progressing sometimes faster through these milestones. I think, I'll talk a little bit like the old way, and then I'll also say like, look, I've got hypotheses about the new way. But, I've spent, a good amount of time, building from the ground up and advising startups just like you all. And I think like, usually in the beginning, again, you hire maybe an AE, and then you start to, kind of, build an AE function out. You let them hold on to, deals post sales and, kind of own the relationship end to end. It's a beautiful world, right? They're hunting, keeping what they kill, they're mounting it on the wall. They get to do all the, kind of pieces of this. And I think somewhere around usually around 30 million for me is when you start to think about, okay, gosh, the AE team we build now can't be full sales cycle anymore because we've got such a big customer base now, that we need to have somebody who can own the post sales journey and be, really kind of thinking about again, it varies by product, but I would say you have to think about are they getting usage out of the product and are they adopting regularly and we keeping them trained up? And a regular AE who's, the one who got them to buy and make this decision isn't probably this person who's going to, help them keep those metrics, healthy and make sure you can retain them. So I think at that kind of, marker, that's where I tend to see us say, okay, it's time to split the team a little bit and kind of bifurcate the focus. The SDR AE thing too is a big one. I'm super intrigued about the death of the AI, the SDR kind of clickbait stuff. I know that SalesLoft announced that they got rid of their entire SDR organization, and there was a lot of audible gasps across the internet on that one. And I think,
do you know that's actually not true?
Is it not true?
They just renamed them. And so they made them, they brought them under the closing organization, but a lot of it was for show. So
okay.
It was, yeah. It was a PR
and
thing, but I agree with you on that.
I was going to say that's
when I read it too, I was like, how is that even possible? Yeah.
But I actually acknowledge them for adapting and changing.
Previously back when money was cheap, there was a growth at all cost model, especially when you think about the way that we made investments into organizations. And so specialized roles made sense because the level of velocity in order to acquire customers, it was just too much for one AE to handle all the way through. Like everyone was like, hey, get the meeting, go close the meeting, go hand it off, go do the implementations, do the onboarding, right? And so it made sense because you were just spending a dollar to make a dollar, and we weren't really looking for efficiencies there. And I think now, especially since right around 2021, when a lot of tech took a kind of a big dump, it was that now we're looking for efficiencies, and so everything is so focused on how can those numbers make sense that the specialized roles don't make as much sense anymore, especially when you think about everyone having to go a little bit more up market and have bigger deal sizes. And when you throw in like the PLG model, or things are trying to go, from an inbound perspective where people can just sign up. And so I don't necessarily think it's dead. I just think it had its place and still has its place, but the numbers have to make sense.
Yep. No, it totally is. That's exactly kind of the thing that led us there. I actually think again, the genesis and the reason for the role, will have its, kind of, refocusing and recentering. Like my belief is it's evolving, not dying. And I do think I get excited to hear about, we'll need fewer of them. That is for sure, because I think there was a lot of things that, we tasked SDRs with that probably, weren't a good use of their time even. So I think the beauty for me is that we can actually, have fewer of them and skill them up in, better, different ways. They're, again, back to kind of, clickbait, rage bait articles. There was a post recently about the new SDR will make 200K, and, here's why. And it's this, super
inflation.
SDR. Yeah. It's we can afford a house now. And,
right.
Yeah, exactly. It fits the inflation numbers here. But no, it's definitely intriguing because I think it actually changes the way you think about the role. I met with, one of the leaders of the, kind of the SDR community, and he and I were having a conversation about this, and, he was like, I think the investment that we put into SDRs is going to shift. I think that, for, a lot of other reasons that, kind of fit exactly what you're saying, Sean, like we treated them like low cost units, indispensable at times. I think that had some unfortunate side effects, but I think, his thought was there's, companies out there now that are like bringing them in. They are probably paying more and hiring more skilled, and they're also putting them through like rotational programs in CS and, other parts of the sales function, for a little bit beforehand. So, when they are, utilizing that touch point, it's a real high value touch point. And that gets me excited as well. I do think the SDR, for sure, the SDR, of 4 or 5 years from now, if they still make it, I think we'll be a different, animal. It'll be a different breed. And I'm kind of excited to see, what their usage of tools and technology looks like, their, level of adaptability looks like. It definitely, is going to change, and that's going to be a fun thing to see.
Yeah, I agree with that strategy on the time invested, because they're really, the way I always saw sales development was they're a feeder into the rest of the organization. So a lot of times they could go into account management, they could go into customer success, they could go into recruiting a lot of times as well. And so like that skill set, I think they need to have a broad understanding of the business and kind of the inner workings, because they're the front line, the first people that they come into contact with a potential customer, right? So they have to be educated, but also like they're not all going to be great closers. And so there needs to be an opportunity for them to kind of feed through the rest of the organization.
Yeah, no, you could, it's great to hear that you feel the same way. I think so too. And I've heard you all say on the show many times, like it's one of the hardest jobs in the, the company. And, I think probably the thing that scares me the most about some of the, kind of like, hypothesis of the future is that, I feel the same way too. I think it is, the entire, sales population that we know today, or the majority of them, came up through a feeder system, and that feeder system was the SDR. And so, as we shrink that base down, or if we, really whittle it down, we do, we'll have some, I think down the road ramifications, because we're losing that, kind of feeder system, and, that ability for people to learn and test, and experiment and get ready for a full cycle kind of AE role.
Well, it's a good tee up for what I was going to ask you next around just career pathing in sales. I think it's one of those things that doesn't get really talked about much, because it's like, well, you're either a sales leader or you're a seller. Well, we'll take our best seller, we'll turn them into a manager. But, in startup land, it's kind of easy, right? You know, that's not easy actually, because you say, I need a sales leader. And then what you really need is someone to close deals, but the sales
Yeah.
leader you hire doesn't close deals. So that's a whole different topic. But I think about the frontline manager. I remember, you know, working in SaaS in the Marketo days and all those kinds of things. And like, nobody teaches anybody how to be a frontline manager. You had one, so you mimic the things you liked and you try to kick out the things you don't like. But I don't know. I don't know if people even know what they're getting themselves into. Like, oh, you want to be a manager?
Yeah.
Right? Like, what's your thought on career pathing for sales? Because, you know, there's a lot of different flavors of that.
Yeah, super important. And, you know, I think, you know, you're hitting on a great topic. Like there's no other, you know, I would say like profession, you know, kind of, you know, part of, you know, the business ecosystem where, you know, a top performer doesn't make a good leader. Like actually like that, the failure rate is like really high, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
As we know, we've seen this, you know, seen this one before, you know, but I think like in engineering, if you're a great engineer, you probably could lead engineers, you know, if you're a great product, you know, manager, you can, you know, lead that function. But I think, you know, uniquely sales, you know, it's sometimes the skills that it makes, you know, takes to be a top performer is like the antithesis of what it takes to be a great leader. And,
That's right.
you know, how do you, you know, unwire that or, you know, spot people that have, you know, those extra skills to make that jump? You know, that is a big thing there. And so I do think, you know, you're absolutely right. Like, I think that, you know, why they fail, you know, is typically because, you know, they haven't had great mentors. They haven't had someone who said like, hey, this is, you know, if this is a challenge you want to take on, you're going to have to change. And, you know, you're no longer going to be the center of attention and the, you know, the spotlight. It's going to be everybody else but you. And that's winning, you know, and are you okay with that? You know, you really have to, you know, find people that enjoy developing people, you know, just as much as they like winning deals. And so it does take that shift. And I don't think there's, you know, enough education done around like what it takes to make that leap, you know, or else we would have a higher success rate of people making that transition.
Yeah. So many sellers that I run into are like, oh, I want to be a VP of sales or a CRO or this, that. I'm like, do you? I mean, maybe you do. I don't know. And that's great. And you've got the temperament for it and this and that. But like, you know, you can go up the ladder as an IC and make a shitload of money and have a pretty good life where no one really bothers you, especially if you're really good and not worry about much. Whereas if you're the CRO, the weight of the organization feels like it's on your back every single week. So just that awareness and education and people having some self-awareness, I think is one of those things about themselves that gets lost sometimes.
Yeah, good point. I mean, I've actually would say like, as I, you know, try to counsel and coach as many folks through this journey, like I actually like appreciate the ones who come into this, you know, and say, I'm not sure if I'm ready, you know, and I'm like, all right, there's self-awareness, right? Like, you know, I think you're ready. They just need confidence in the push, you know, like you know, the ones I know that I'm like, okay, this is another one that I have to, you know, kind of like mark on my list of mistakes here. If I promote them when they come in and they're like, I'm great and I've wanted everything I've done and I'm ready for this now, John, you know? And again, it's like, okay, like we probably, you know, Sean, Josh, we should probably do like a version of Scared Straight where we sit down with a lot of young leaders and say, or young ICs and say, you don't know what you want. And like, here's what you need to think about, you know, if you're going to make this leap, but it's, you know, for the right people, it's the right thing. You know, how do you make sure people understand what they're getting into and not have that, you know, kind of crazy, chaotic moment end up in a bad one.
Everyone wants a seat at the table until they sit there. But I think this also kind of comes back to what we were talking about earlier. Like, coaching is hard, and that's another type of coaching, right? That's not deal coaching, it's not pipeline coaching. That's professional coaching, right? And so I think a lot of that doesn't happen, and so, you know, if management was to take a little bit more effort into that, right, then you can also help guide people career pathing and make sure they understand, you know, what it is that they're actually thinking they're signing up for.
Well, one thing I want you to leave us with here is we talked a little bit about market shifts, market dynamics. Right over the past 10 years, it's been fairly tumultuous with change. The buyer's attention has been harder and harder to capture. Everything you do isn't always scalable. But as a revenue leader, like, what's the one thing revenue leaders out there should be thinking about, regardless, you know, from startup to mid-market type companies? Like, what's the first thing they should be thinking about?
Yeah, look, I think experimentation, you know, like building a culture of experimentation is probably like my answer on this. And, I think when times get tough, we often forget that and we hunker down on the things that we know, and I think, being, adaptable and being able to, have parts of your team or parts of your focus be on experiments, so that you can spot these trends and shift through them. I'm actually like one of the things that I think has really benefited me, and I did it for other reasons, but it's helped me. But like, build your network of others in your role, and like really spend time with them,
Yeah.
from time to time, and use them as your sounding board. And if you don't have that, join a community like Pavilion or something to get access to more folks going through that. But I think, it's hard out there. And I do think like, at the end of the quarter, you could have a really tough one and you could be like, I'm going to go inward and just think it's just me and it's just my team. And so I think like, being able to hear, what others are, kind of going through, and if they're feeling or seeing the same things, it at least gives some balance to some of the things that you're working through. It gives you that outlet to learn about like what they're doing, and then you can kind of weave that back into your experimentation, kind of flywheel and system there. But I think, I find, myself like seeking out, others just to just catch up with them and see like what challenges are they facing, what are they, kind of seeing out there. And it does help me, kind of navigate this, and so I'd say like for many, like make sure you have that established if you don't.
I love that. Yeah. Experimentation, it stems from curiosity. And if you're not continuously curious about your customer, your buyer, your market, like it's just not going to happen. And I think the humility to say, I'm going to do this, it might not work. Right. And be okay with that, and be okay to say that to your boss, probably the CEO, and to your team, like, hey, we're going to do this. We're going to do it with conviction, but also know it might not work. So I think that's it's a good, humble stance, and things that people need to, realize as we go to market. We likely don't have all the answers, and the buyers are shifting and their behaviors are shifting all the time. So that ability to have some humility as we take things to market and understand that you're not out there alone. So that's great advice, John. So before we let you go, where can folks find you, find Orum? Give us the quick rundown.
Yeah. So John Eitel on LinkedIn is probably the best way to, find me, engage with me. Orum.com is the company. So if you're thinking about, trying to focus on coaching development, want to establish an outbound culture, I think we definitely would love to talk to you. So please keep us in mind. And thanks for having me on the show.
Awesome. Well, on behalf of Sean Kester and the absent Justin Gray, thank you for listening to another episode of The Cheat Code and Friends. Please subscribe to the show. It expands our reach. And until next time, we will see you then.